Well, I'm Bridey.
And I'm Jiney.
And we are best friends who have created a podcast.
So I'm Jazz, and my podcast is called All That Jazz.
Well, I'm making a podcast basically about a town called Imagination Shire. It's a very creative podcast all about art and creativity and celebrating people who are creative. And in the podcast, basically, I'm the mayor of Imagination Shire. And so I walk through a whole bunch of different creative subjects.
We pretty much talk about our friendship and how we are the complete opposite in so many ways, yet the exact same. As you can tell, we're from different cultures.
I'm Korean, she's Australian.
Yeah.
And we have such similar things, like our humor, our morals, everything is very similar, but also very different. Like we argue a lot.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the premise of the show. We're different, but the same.
Yeah, and we're journeying through adulthood as best friends and through life together.
Yeah.
In my podcast, I chat to all different people from different walks of life who are all thriving in their various fields. They're all just real people who are authentically themselves. And the podcast is really just about being inclusive and authentic. And it's we call it the party you're always invited to. So it's a really fun kind of place where people just, it's all about embracing, everything that you are to become the most authentic version of you. And we cover all different topics from self-confidence to growing up, high school, finding your passion.
It just was so natural, I think, because this is our friendship and we are who we are, and to put that to mic was so natural. I was like, we can't do anything else.
You can probably tell we just love chatting things out, and we love talking about ourselves. It just all made sense.
It all came very naturally, which is really good.
I was paired up with a whole bunch of amazing creators and producers and things like that who really helped me narrow down all of my different ideas that I needed to kind of channel into a podcast, because I'm a TikToker and not used to podcasting.
I kind of always had podcasting in the back of my mind as a content creator, but it wasn't something that I ever thought I would end up pursuing. But when I found out about the program, I was like, okay, this could be a cool way to get to know, my audience can get to know me in a different way and kind of a bit more in depth than my short form videos.
Making waves is kind of more like a ripple effect to me. I make one wave and then somebody else makes another wave and then it goes on.
Make waves is just really about making a difference. Because we're in a world where it's so easy, I was saying, to get lost in the idea of fitting in or feeling like you have to change yourself in order to fit in. So I think making waves is really just about switching up the game and kind of changing up the media world as a whole.
We are the biggest blabbermouths. We go off on tangents. We just don't have any structure, because we're just on the podcast because we're talking the way we would normally talk at lunch. So our biggest challenge is putting structure into this and actually making it easy for people to follow along.
Yeah. Also opening up and being vulnerable in front of people I can't even see was a big difficult challenge, but which is really fun because we're able to reach out to so many people, but at the same time that is a lot of people.
One of the main challenges so far has been the idea of how to bring people across from socials to podcasting, because my audience, I was saying, is quite young, so they aren't really in the whole podcasting world just yet. This might be the first podcast they've ever listened to. So it's kind of just figuring out how to also make sure that they're interested in it and that we're discussing topics that they're interested in listening to.
So many. So the first challenge that I had was figuring out how to put art into an audio format. We had to go through so many different ideas and processes to actually decide what the podcast was going to be about.
Being able to connect with people with the same struggles or the problems we have.
Learning the whole process of how to make a podcast firstly, the behind the scenes of it, because I had no idea how podcasts were created. So that's been really cool.
I love receiving messages from people who are listening to the podcast saying that they absolutely love it.
There are so many people I'd love to have on the show, but I think one of the top ones that comes to mind is, her name's Casey Stroh, and she played Martha in High School Musical, and she is just a body positivity advocate and actress, dancer, just all-round queen. I would love to have her on the show.
Ooh, I'll leave this one with you. I don't know.
A dream collab.
They're all so good. Who's the dream? Probably gee, thanks. We think they're younger girls just like us. We think we would relate with them really well.
The besties.
I know for sure it would be Brenda Rock Johnson because a while ago I created a tattoo for him and I put it on TikTok and I think it got 15 million views and he still hasn't seen it, and so I want him to come on the podcast and ask him why he hasn't seen it yet and if he's just avoiding my TikTok. That's what I want to know. I would say work out what you want to say and do through your podcast to start off with. What's the purpose? What do you want your audience to get out of it? That kind of a thing. Because if there's no real purpose to your podcast and there's nothing really that you really want to touch on or you really want to change, then it's really hard to keep a continuing podcast going just because you don't really have a basis for what content you need.
Give it a go. When we first started the podcast, we had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea. All we knew is that there's a mic and you speak into it. We had no idea about like the structure and the planning that goes into it.
Yeah, and how it's a lot of planning.
I think probably like finding something that sets you apart is really important, and making sure that you're not just, starting a podcast for the sake of it, like making sure that there's a purpose behind it and that it's with the right intentions. And yeah, just having fun, because it's easy to be like super strict and like serious about it, but it's also like important to remember that if it's something that you would love to listen to and feel excited by, then I'm sure that the people who are listening are going to feel the same way.